There is a specific, blinding, and incredibly comforting illusion that humanity desperately clings to. An illusion meticulously built on soaring modern architecture, flawlessly paved roads, and the warm, artificial glow of city lights. We walk upon the surface of the earth completely convinced of our own permanence. We look up at the vast sky, entirely oblivious to the terrifying silent reality, waiting patiently directly beneath our feet. Nowhere on this planet is this illusion more profound or more beautifully deceptive than in the beating heart of France, Paris, the city of lights, the undisputed European pinnacle of art, romance, and cultural triumph. Every single day, millions of oblivious people walk its vibrant, sunlit cobblestone streets. They drink coffee in warm cafes, they fall in love beneath the shadow of the Eiffel Tower, and they marvel at the majestic, gilded rooftops. But the living are entirely unaware of the titanic, crushing weight of death they are stepping on, because just 20 meters below those bustling, joyous boulevards, where the golden light of the sun has never and will never reach, lies another kingdom altogether, a kingdom completely devoid of warmth, stripped entirely of light, and perfectly ruthlessly purged of all life. It is an empire of eternal suffocating night. Welcome to the Paris Catacombs, a 300-kilometer-long, pitch-black, infinitely silent labyrinth carved entirely out of cold, damp limestone. But you must understand, this is not a mere geographical anomaly or a forgotten mine. Down here in the freezing dark, the walls are not constructed from mortar, brick, or stone. They are meticulously, obsessively woven from the shattered fossilized remains of 6 million human beings. 6 million individuals, a number so staggeringly immense that the human brain completely fails to comprehend its true scale. 6 million souls, stripped violently of their names, their earthly wealth, and their cherished memories, reduced to nothing but anonymous, hollowed-out skulls and yellowing femurs, holding up the very foundations of the city above them. To truly understand the creation of this ultimate abyss, we must peel back the thick layers of history. We must return to the brutal, diseased reality of the late 18th century. Paris, at the time, was a rapidly expanding metropolis that was quite literally drowning in its own dead. For over 10 uninterrupted centuries, the sprawling cemetery of the Holy Innocents, located directly in the center of the city, had been the primary dumping ground for the masses. But the earth is not a bottomless stomach. It can only swallow so much before it begins to violently choke. By the 1780s, the cemetery had wildly, catastrophically exceeded its maximum capacity. Over 2 million decomposing bodies were crammed into a tiny claustrophobic parcel of land meant for only a fraction of that number. The earth was visibly bloated. It was swollen upward, rising like a massive infected wound, with the sheer volume of decaying humanity. Mass graves, plunging 30 feet deep into the dark mud, were left entirely open to the elements. They were piled dangerously high with the forgotten dead of the impoverished class. The stench in Paris was not merely a bad odor. It was a heavy physical entity, a foul, suffocating miasma of putrefaction that hung over the streets like a thick, invisible fog. It poisoned the air so thoroughly that it seeped directly through thick stone walls, turning the fine wine in nearby cellars into foul vinegar. It tainted the fresh bread, corrupted the groundwater, and spread terrifying diseases like a relentless, invisible tide. Human hubris, the desperate attempt by the living to simply hide death out of sight, was failing miserably. Nature, as it always does, was finally demanding a violent, undeniable reckoning. And then, in the wet, miserable spring of 1780, the ultimate breaking point arrived. Under the sheer, crushing weight of centuries of saturated earth, heavy rain, and packed corpses, the massive, ancient stone retaining wall of the Holy Innocents Cemetery catastrophically failed. But it did not collapse outward onto an empty street. It violently burst backward, tearing directly through the foundation walls of adjacent residential properties. In the dead of the night, ordinary citizens of Paris descended into their dark, quiet basements with a simple flickering candle, only to find a colossal landslide of rotting earth, ancient black mud, and thousands of mangled, putrefying skeletons violently pouring onto their floors. Death had physically broken through the walls. The dead were actively, violently reclaiming the space of the living. The panic that immediately gripped the city was absolute. The royal decree was swift, driven by sheer, unfiltered terror. The city of Paris had to be entirely purged of its dead. But the logistical nightmare facing the crown was staggering. Where do you possibly relocate 6 million decaying bodies? The chilling perfect answer lay in the very geological foundation of Paris itself. For centuries, medieval miners had recklessly carved vast networks of Lutetian limestone from deep beneath the city. This specific hardened stone was extracted over generations to build the magnificent cathedrals and palaces above. But this unchecked extraction had left a sprawling, hollow, highly unstable void beneath the streets. The poetic irony was undeniably terrifying. The very stone extracted to house the living had perfectly created the infinite, waiting void to house the dead. And so, the great macabre transfer began, an industrial-scale nightly ritual that lasted for over a decade. Every single night, as the heavy shroud of darkness covered the city, the cobbled streets of Paris echoed with a chilling symphony. Black-draped, horse-drawn wooden carts, groaning heavily under the immense weight of ancient, dirt-caked bones, rolled slowly through the fog. They were escorted by long lines of solemn priests, chanting low, somber Latin dirges for the disturbed dead. Their flickering, oily torches cast long demonic shadows against the stone walls of the city. Down they went, deep into the earth, millions upon millions of skeletons, poured endlessly into the dark, waiting maws of the old limestone quarries. But the massive piles of bones were not simply dumped in chaotic heaps. They were meticulously arranged. Anonymous quarry workers, operating by the dim light of tiny oil lamps in the freezing, oxygen-deprived air, began to organize the chaos. With the cold, calculated precision of a morbid artist, they built walls. They separated the long, sturdy femurs. They separated the hollow skulls. And they stacked them, endless, perfect geometric walls of human remains, a horrific, mesmerizing mosaic of mortality that stretched for unimaginable miles. However, these endless tunnels do not merely swallow the dead. Over the centuries, they have developed a ravenous hunger for the living. The true paralyzing horror of descending into the catacombs is not simply the presence of the dead. It is the terrifying physical weight of the architectural claustrophobia. When you step into the deep network, the low, jagged rock ceiling physically presses down on your shoulders. You are forced to bow entirely to the dead. The endless walls of skulls stare back at you from the shadows with deep, empty sockets, silently judging your every step. The air itself is unnaturally heavy. It is stale, smelling deeply of wet limestone, stagnant pools, and ancient bone dust. And above all, above everything else, is the darkness. To lose your light down here is a fate significantly worse than death itself. It is a slow, one-way descent into a psychological hell. Let me tell you the tragic, forgotten story of Philibert Aspairt. The year was 1793. Above ground, the chaotic, bloody French Revolution was tearing the nation apart. But 20 meters below the surface, the dead do not care about the trivial wars of the living. Philibert, a simple hospital porter, made a fatal, historically inexplicable decision. Armed with nothing but a single flickering wax candle, he entered the forbidden labyrinth alone. Perhaps he was searching for a legendary forgotten stash of liquor, or perhaps it was sheer fatal curiosity. We will never truly know. He walked deep into the massive network. Mile after mile of completely identical, confusing corridors. Wall after wall of grinning, silent skulls passing by in the dim, golden halo of his solitary flame. The temperature immediately dropped, locking into a constant, chilling 14 degrees Celsius. The silence down there is not empty. It is a heavy, crushing physical force that intensely rings in your ears, isolating your brain from reality. And then, deep in the uncharted sectors, a sudden invisible draft of air swept through the tunnel. A momentary misstep in the dark. The candle violently extinguishes. Put yourself directly in Philibert's shoes at that exact, terrifying second. The darkness in the deep catacombs is not like closing your eyes in a bedroom at night. It is a physical, suffocating weight. It is an absolute, devouring sensory deprivation. Without any microscopic source of ambient light, your eyes never adjust. You are entirely, permanently blind. Primal, inescapable, animalistic panic sets in within seconds. He reaches out frantically into the void, but his trembling hands only find the cold, smooth surfaces of ancient human skulls stacked along the walls. He spins around, desperately trying to retrace his steps, but direction instantly ceases to exist. North, south, up, down. The entire concept of physical space vanishes completely into the blackness. He screams at the top of his lungs, a desperate, tearing cry for help. But the highly porous, damp limestone walls act like an acoustic sponge, immediately absorbing the sound, entirely choking his voice in the dark. He stumbles blindly forward, crawling on his heavily bruised hands and bleeding knees through the freezing, ankle-deep muddy water. Hours seamlessly turn into days. The relentless, sensory-deprived darkness begins to violently fracture his mind. Severe visual and auditory hallucinations plague his dying brain. The absolute silence is slowly, terrifyingly replaced by the phantom, echoing whispers of the 6 million dead souls surrounding him, mocking his futile struggle. Dehydration heavily thickens his blood, turning his mouth to ash. Starvation steadily eats away at his muscle tissue. The biting damp cold induces a slow, agonizing hypothermia. He wanders aimlessly for miles in the suffocating black, completely, devastatingly alone, yet trapped in the single most crowded graveyard on planet Earth. Driven entirely, hopelessly mad by the unforgiving darkness, Philibert Aspairt collapsed. He died alone, lying perfectly still on the cold, wet stone floor. His petrified, hardened remains were not found by underground explorers until exactly 11 years later. The deeply tragic, bitter, and horrifying irony of his demise, when they finally discovered his skeletal remains, his hand still desperately clutching a rusted set of keys. He was found just a few mere meters away from a staircase leading directly up to the surface. He had died entirely blind to his own salvation. Today, in the modern era, the grand empire of the dead remains mostly locked away from the surface world. Of the sprawling 300 kilometers of mapped tunnels, 99% are strictly forbidden by French law, welded firmly shut by heavy iron gates. Only a tiny, heavily sanitized fraction is legally open to tourists. But the allure of the terrifying unknown is far too strong for some to resist. Deep in the unmapped, dangerous underground, a highly secretive subculture thrives in the shadows, the cataphiles. These are dedicated urban explorers who actively risk heavy fines and their very own lives to bypass the strict patrols. They squeeze their bodies through impossibly narrow gaps, fully exhaling the air from their lungs just to fit their rib cages through solid rock. They descend into the unlit zones, wading through deep, freezing, flooded corridors. They meticulously map the unmapped sectors, navigating the collapsing corridors where one wrong turn means vanishing forever. But why? Why risk absolutely everything to sit in the cold, wet dark of a mass grave? Because paradoxically, they seek the profound, crushing silence of the dead. It is an absolute, meditative escape from the overwhelming, deafening noise and frantic chaos of the modern world above. Down there, time completely stops. The Paris Catacombs stand as humanity's greatest, most terrifying, and most absolute equalizer. It does not matter who you are on the sunlit surface. You could be a king draped in fine velvet, a violent revolutionary, a wealthy merchant, or a starving beggar. Down here, beneath the crushing weight of the limestone, in the cold, wet, silent dark, all crowns inevitably rust. All worldly wealth completely dissolves into the damp, uncaring soil. Down here, stripped of the grand illusion of life, you are nothing but a shattered, hollow skull, a nameless, anonymous fragment of calcium holding up a crumbling stone wall in the infinite, uncaring dark. Nature, and the relentless march of geological time, will always violently balance the scales of humanity. The beautiful, glowing, majestic city of Paris above will eventually turn to dust, just like the millions of forgotten souls resting silently beneath it. History is not dead. It is not gone. It only waits patiently, heavily in the dark, to be remembered.